our next guest is Dara Cass, who joins us. She's an emergency physician from New York, where she works at Columbia. She's also the founder of FemInM. Had a great night down on the harbour last night with the No M group.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit about your story, plus your storytelling, but I guess we've got to share with the audience something to do with your story, and it's about you and your son. So it seems as though your son, Sammy, was a little bit small.
Yeah. So your story with the pictures, and then to be doing this, I'm like already halfway to crying. So if anybody's with me, it's all good. So Sammy's our third kid. He was smaller than our other two children. And, when I gave birth, I said, okay, we feed them, we grow them. You've seen enough children be born and it's okay. And after 8 weeks, he really just wasn't gaining the weight he was supposed to. This picture here is when he was 4 weeks old. And I had been in the process of taking these monthly pictures of our kids, when they were in their first year, like any overexcited new parent does. And now looking back at this picture, you can see what he looked like. But in the moment, I didn't see it as much. I was like, all right, he's skinny, looks like a little bit of an old man. We got to feed him, grow him, and it was hot. This picture prompted a lot of other people and our pediatrician to say, he's not really growing the way he's supposed to. And so we started measuring his food intake and doing all the things we had to do and realized that he was not holding on to calories the way he was supposed to. So she looked at him and she said, I think he's kind of yellow. And I said, well, if he's yellow, we got to figure it out. She did some bilirubin and found out that he had an elevated, conjugated bilirubinemia, which as an ER doctor, I had to go back into the bowels of all the knowledge I had and said, neonatal jaundice. Okay, let's figure this out. Long and short of it, he was like 57 days at the time, and so was right at the head of the biliary tree to work up. And long and short, it turns out he had something called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency.
Yes, so I resisted the urge to put a slide up about
Right.
the metabolism of alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Now, but it's interesting because this isn't a common disease. Most
Right.
people in the community wouldn't know what it was. This is a photograph of you and your family at a sort of charity event related to the disease. I guess this must be a bit of a role for healthcare professionals if they become a bit closer to a condition. Is that right?
Yeah, so the truth is that when we got the call that he had this disease, the doctor was like, it's great news. He's mostly going to do fine. He'll grow out of it. It won't be an issue until he's 40. I'm like, okay, 40 is a while from now. Let's do this. And let's get active. So we joined the Alpha-1 Foundation. We marched across the George Washington Bridge, and we said, all right, let's wait this out. Science is moving fast. We'll see what happens.
Okay, but then it didn't go quite how you thought. Sammy got a bit of an intercurrent illness, and you found yourself at a bit more of a critical juncture.
Right, so it turns out that of the patients that have alpha-1, most of them will grow out of liver disease, but a fraction of them won't. And Sammy was one of the ones who didn't. And so we had monitored him for fibrotic liver disease and scarring. And over the year, he did a couple of ultrasounds and looking for the blood flow. And at a year, his doctor turned to me in the ER when we were working him up for SBP because he had a fever and said, I think he's going to need a transplant. And the second thing he said to me was, would you donate? And about 7 milliseconds later, I think, I said, yes. And that was the beginning of that conversation.
So here's a photo of you having that, or him having that ultrasound, and you said that you didn't hesitate, and I imagine many parents might feel the same way, but I suppose, how was this different because you were also, I guess, a health professional, you're thinking about some other roles that you've got in your family, it's going to be hard to be the caregiver as well as the donor.
Yeah, so as a doctor and as a mom and a wife and a daughter and all these things, I'd always been kind of the medical home for my family, right? I'm the one that absorbs the anxiety of anyone's medical illness. And even in this picture, you can see he's getting a very long ultrasound. So I'm feeding him grapes like he's a prince, because at the end of the day, he was laughing. And that's all that mattered, right? Keeping it lighthearted, making sure it didn't interject too much anxiety into our family. However, as a donor, you have to go under anesthesia, right? And you have to be incapacitated for a period of time. And so my only concerns in that process was, who's going to replace me in those moments? Because as my son was undergoing what will be the largest and most complicated experience of his life, I was going to be unconscious. And I needed to figure out how could I feel as good as a parent and as a doctor and as a mom and as a donor? And so I went about replacing myself in all of my identities in that space.
Yeah, and there was something you told me earlier when we were speaking that I hadn't even thought of, that you stopped taking blood and doing procedures because the worst thing that could have happened is if you got a needle stick injury.
And in all fairness, that was a nurse, actually, that came to me in the ER and said, you should stop putting in your own IVs. And as an ER doctor, I was really very good at putting in IVs, and I liked to do it. It was more efficient. And she's like, but if you get stuck, you can't donate. It was like within like the 30-day window. And I was like, wow. I literally had never thought of myself first in the job, except I wasn't thinking of myself first. I was thinking of my child first, and so I could do that.
But still, it does start to threaten those identities that you're talking about. So this is Sammy's liver.
Right.
This is yours,
right,
which is pretty good after medical school.
Right.
And,
so that's what we said, right? He had, that first liver was a 2-year-old foie gras, right? You can't eat foie gras, by the way, after this whole experience. It's just a done thing. So, and mine was this beautiful, smooth, like it looked like salmon or whatever. Like it was, I come out, I wake up in the ICU, and my doctor was like, do you want to see what your liver looked like? And I was like, totally. And she's like, it's gorgeous. I was like, awesome.
Only at SMAC can you talk about your body parts
Totally.
like this, yeah. All right, so it all went well, which I guess is not always the case. And one of the things I wanted to ask you as we kind of think about your storytelling now is that you do have a happy ending to your story. I wonder if that influences who and how you tell it.
So I think that we have our ending, right? I think it's a happy ending insofar as he is amazing and healthy as he can be. And there are some days that are harder than others. But I know, and I was telling Simon this before, that we're really lucky, right? At every juncture of our illness or our strife, there was always a thing we could do to move forward. And even on this day, right, he's miserable because he's NPO. That's it, right? He just wanted water. And I'm thrilled because this is 24 hours after surgery, and we both woke up, right? And it's those victories that we can see in the big picture, just waking up from anesthesia, that helps us get through those moments, because other people don't realize that just waking up from anesthesia is actually a victory. And that helps it become a little bit more attainable.
So the story continues to be good.
It is good.
And I guess turning our attention then to storytelling, because you've told this in a few places.
Yeah.
The poor first years at your institution get this in their Alpha-1 Anti-Trypsin deficiency lecture.
They do.
But you've also told it to the media, both to medical literature as well as popular media. And again, I'm going to ask you the same question that I said to Jill. Obviously, it's a happy story. But why tell it, and how do you choose to tell it?
So I take my privilege seriously, I think, as an educated consumer of healthcare, as somebody who lives in a country that I can generally tell my story in an empowered way. I think that that's a privilege. When I wanted to understand the process of being an organ donor, I could not find the answer. I could not understand what it was going to be like for my child, for myself, to undergo this procedure. And actually, ironically, it was Esther Chu, who is here, and you'll all meet her if you haven't already. And I said, I need to I need to write more and share my experiences. She goes, write about the transplant. And I said, who would care? Really? And she's like, you have no idea what you've gone through is so extraordinary. And so I started writing, and I submitted it to the New York Times. And the process for this particular article was about the layperson, because if a mother is told that that her child needs an organ, and they offer her the opportunity to donate, what questions does she have, right? What concerns does she have, and who can she see having done that before her? And it's about modeling and education and allowing people to see our vulnerabilities, our successes, and our fears. And in that way, it's been amazing.
So we still need our patient information fact sheets, but you're saying there's a narrative story that can add to that people are going to really connect with.
The most important fact we learned was what happens to the liver between my body and his, right? You have no idea. It turns out in our hospital, they walk it down a hallway in a cooler. Now, my husband, who's not a doctor, was like, how do we know they don't fall? Like, can I wrap them in bubble wrap? And that, in the article, we talk about how does the organ get from one body to another? Because that's an extraordinary thing to understand. And now we know.
I think actually there was an early episode of Grey's Anatomy where that was featured in the heart.
There's always an episode of Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah. All right, Simon, there must be, again, just one or two comments.
I mean, the first thing is people are trying to get #LiverEnvy trending on Twitter, which is a challenge. Maybe that's just me. Huge empathy for what you've done. It's clearly changed how you see yourself as both physician, patient, mother, wife. How would you advise, how's it changed your role with patients and maybe other colleagues who've experienced or going to experience something similar to you?
So this was the first time that I was really vulnerable. I mean, I'd given birth a few times and I had survived that. But I had never really lost my mind until this happened to me. And I remember that I was at work at an event and my chair was talking about a book on failed transplants and how people died. And I was like, oh my God, I have to leave the room. And I did. And it had never happened to me before. And I realized that the amount of repression that we go through as emergency doctors, critical care doctors, right? We compartmentalize so many aspects of our humanity. We see horrible things and we have to put them away so we can go home to our families. And if our family is where the horrible thing is happening and we have to go to work and see other horrible things, then you kind of have nothing left. You have nowhere else to hide it. And so there was a point where I had no more hiding places. And I just had to go into a room and let it out. And I think that knowing that we're all gonna find a day where we're gonna run out of hiding places, and that giving each other the space to have those moments was probably the most important thing I learned for myself and other doctors from this.
Which I think probably connects to Laura's message there, is that, you know, you can deny that emotion, but if you've got some skills, probably that process is going to be a bit easier. All right, well, amazing story. Very interesting to hear about the storytelling. Would you again please join me in thanking Dara Cass?
Thank you.